Episode 15. Eine Rethinking Memory Memory Café Episode. Fließend Spanisch lernen in nur einem Monat? Ist das möglich? Ja, mit den Speed Learning Techniken von Timothy Moser. Heute hier im Gespräch im Memory Café bei Rethinking Memory.
Einfach lernen mit Rethinking Memory.
Im Gespräch mit Timothy Moser, Gründer von masterofmemory.com und SpanishInOneMonth.com, einem Speedlearning-Kurs, der englischsprachigen Native Speakern verspricht, ihnen die spanische Sprache innerhalb eines Monats fließend beizubringen. Diese Memory Café Episode ist auf Englisch. In this first of 4 Memory Café talks, Timothy and I talk about our personal experience with speed learning and how we came to be speed learning coaches. And now, without any further ado, Timothy Moser and Florian Wurm in our Rethinking Memory Memory Café. So Timothy, when did you first hear about mnemonic techniques?
When I was a kid, my parents gave me this book, I think several books about learning and about self-study because as a homeschooled kid, being taught at home, I had to take initiative and do a lot of learning on my own. And so part of our curriculum was really books about how to learn, which I thought was really cool. And I saw various techniques for self-learning and memorization in them. And to be honest, I kind of thought that the mnemonic stuff was kind of gimmicky. I was like, why would I add information to something where I could just learn it directly? So I specifically remember being resistant to that in the early days and trying to create my own ways of memorizing without mnemonics. So I actually, when I was a teenager, I liked to try to program things. I wrote a little text program where I would type out questions and answers and require myself to answer them perfectly every single time. So I would type in the answer. And if I got one letter wrong or a comma or a period wrong, it would say wrong and make me do it again. And so what I figured out was while doing that process, I actually had an easier time getting it correct if I did use mnemonics, if I did use the memory tricks. And so that sold me on it early on.
Very interesting.
What about you? What was your first exposure to mnemonics?
Well, I can't remember a particular time, but I think it was somewhere in my studies in Vienna. I kind of didn't really apply mnemonics to my studies. In fact, what I was interested in was actually memorizing Bible verses. I wanted to memorize Bible verses. Really, it was really important to me. But the act of doing that was really just a chore, like really tiresome. So what I basically did was I started to memorize the whole book of Romans, or not exactly the whole book of Romans, but half of it, so chapters 1 through 8, in the course of a year. And I didn't use any mnemonic technique. It worked pretty well, actually, but I lost a lot after that as well. It took me an hour of memorization and a lot of repeating. And that's when I searched for ways to make it easier. And it was really hard for me to find something. I can think, if I think back, I remember I was searching on various forums on the internet, and I was also searching on Quran forums,
Wow. Because they take memorization very seriously as well.
Exactly. So I was thinking, maybe I can find some help or techniques there that make the process easier, that make it way faster for me to memorize things. But I didn't really find anything. That's not to say that there is nothing out there. It's just that I didn't find anything tangible that worked for me. What I found was that they're just using the same old techniques of rote memorization and repeating it all over. So what I then found was a forum that was talking about mnemonic techniques and how, they use it for memory championships, actually. And then I bought a book about the subject, and it just kind of carried on from there. And then this was back in my studies. So when I finished this, the kind of the topic of memorization, just I brought it along with me, and it was kind of like, I don't know, 2 or 3 years in my work. I still tried to apply mnemonics to my everyday life. So I was it was funny because I was working in a prison actually at that time. I remember I was using the interior of the big prison, which was a big, as you can imagine, a big building. I was using as a memory palace actually, and trying to memorize things for my work there, and it worked pretty well. So this was the date, so to say, when I dug in deeper and I found, I might just as well not only study how to apply mnemonics to my everyday life, but to actually do a training course on it. So this is where I decided to actually become a memory trainer.
Yeah. I think a lot of people have a similar story where people, me and possibly you, when you first hear about memory tricks, you think that they are just tricks. Mm-hmm. But then as soon as you have a very serious memory project to work on and you realize how well they work in the short term and then also surprisingly in the long term.
Exactly.
Very effective memory things, you suddenly want to tell everybody about how well it works.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Do you remember the first time you've ever taught somebody mnemonics?
Who was the actual first one?
You can think about that. I don't necessarily remember it for myself. I just remember I was using it personally for a long time, and it became something that I was just doing a lot, specifically learning things, not specifically the mnemonics themselves. But then I decided to start the website literally just because, so masterofmemory.com was available as a registrable domain. And I kind of thought, oh, that's a cool website where I could possibly put some stuff up and see if people will follow me. And so the real issue there was that there weren't good resources online for mnemonics. There were courses that were paid, and there were very, very crappy looking websites about mnemonics that just were not the most polished, beautiful parts of the web. And I thought I could try to change that a little bit.
So what I did, when I first started, I made some mistakes, I guess. At first, I told my wife, that I'm really excited about this. And I tried to memorize various things, like a couple of verses there, and trying to apply it. And I actually listened to your show as well, trying to get down the major code. And as I did my training course as well, I tried to implement what I learned there and just applied it to my own projects. But the problem was actually communicating to other people how valuable mnemonics are for them. So my wife was like, I have an easy time with memorization, so why should I take a route that's kind of like not really straightforward?
It's less direct, right? It seems like it's hard to convince people of something when it sounds like an extra step.
Yeah, right. And so this, I think, was my main problem at the beginning, that I couldn't really communicate that well. It was only after when I started to really sit down and say, okay, I want to do this training. I have to work on my communication skills to communicate to people better how things really work.
Yeah. Yeah, I think just the way that it's kind of blown my mind how mnemonics and reframing the way that we learn, rethinking memory, has changed my whole life and the way that I approach everything that I learn. From just fun stuff like learning the map of a new city I go to, which I find extremely fun to do. And then also just having random stuff that you can memorize and suddenly convince people that you're knowledgeable on something you just learned about. It's just a lot of fun and personally fulfilling.
That's exactly. And there is also other areas of application. So I can remember a girl I used to coach. She studied for the medical exam in Austria. And there is one particular part where they have to memorize allergy ID cards. So there is a photo on it and a name and a couple of other informations like birthday and social security number and allergies and blood groups and whatnot. And what they have to do there is they will have to memorize 8 cards in 8 minutes. And that's about 64 to 80 bits of information that they would have to memorize in only 8 minutes. So what I did with her was actually coaching her to apply those principles to that learning feat, which was really a cool thing because I could see her progress. At the first, in the beginning, she had a hard time with figuring out memory palaces that worked well for her. So we worked on that. And then after that, we tried to work on the major system, that is a number memory system that works really well. And as soon as she got that down, she just tried to memorize those allergy cards, right? And so at first, it took her like 18 minutes to memorize eight of those. And then as we worked on her speed, she got stuck at 11 minutes. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty impressive if you can memorize 8 cards in 11 minutes with that amount of information. But still, it was not enough for the training. So at the very end of our coaching, I can remember she was like, "Oh, I'm not gonna hit the 8-minute mark anytime soon." And I just encouraged her, to relax and sit back and just trust her brain to do the work for her. And what actually happened is like 2 days later or something, she texted me and she was so excited. She was like, "Oh, I did it in like 7 minutes now."
Wow. Yeah, isn't that the most fulfilling thing when something that works for you that you've been applying and trying to evangelize for so long, somebody else suddenly starts raving about it back to you.
Yeah, that's the most fulfilling thing. And that's actually what's driving me also with rethinking memory. Like that's the core of rethinking memory. I want to bring ancient mnemonics to the 21st century and show people how easily they can be applied to various learning topics and various everyday life topics and enhance your memory in a very easy and practical way. And to be able to memorize huge amounts of information with actually not a lot of effort and with fun. That's actually the cool thing about it.
And I think that bringing mnemonics to the 21st century, when we talk about this subject, people think about how information is at our fingertips. We can always look things up when we want to. But for me, that's actually one of the exciting things about memorization, because if I choose that I want to memorize the coordinates of various cities or the layout of a city so that I can walk around in, I've never been to, let's say, Berlin. I could memorize the map of Berlin without having to go there and look up local maps. I can the information's right at my fingertips and downloadable to my brain using accelerated learning techniques. And so I think that the idea that we no longer have to memorize things is pretty bogus, and that there's plenty of you can always just go and look up why we need to memorize things. For our brains are designed to memorize things. We need to exercise that memory. And so now the fact that information is at our fingertips is, I think, kind of paradoxically, another reason to spend time memorizing things, actually.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, it makes it more fulfilling and easier. And I think it's just a great pastime as well.
So what would you say, what's the most fulfilling part in using mnemonics for you?
For me, I think it's the idea that the entire universe and all of humankind and, let's say, human history, everything that humans have created, seems like an infinite amount of information. But if you find some of the major, let's say, webs of information, you can fill in those gaps. And for me, the exciting thing is it feels like you're learning everything. So an easy analogy for this is, or a very simple example is, if you look at the entire world, and there are almost 8 billion people in the world, instead of trying to remember, let's say you're learning geography, instead of trying to remember everything about the whole world, just learn the major cities of the world, the biggest cities of the world, where they are, who lives there, what languages they speak. And suddenly you know a whole lot about the world because you know these major cities. So a few cities in Europe, several cities in Asia, and a few cities in the Americas, and then a few in Africa. Suddenly you know these giant cultural centers. And if somebody says that they recently went to Cairo or to to Berlin or whatever, you know where these places are, you know who lives there, and it feels like with just a little bit of information that you've memorized, you suddenly have connection to more of the world. And another exciting thing is, let's say you apply that exact same principle to history instead of geography. Instead of trying to learn something interesting about every year in history, which is impossible, there are too many years in history, you can just learn about the major wars, which were the major turning points in history.
Right.
And then by kind of zooming in on major events like that and learning who the players were, what the events were, how it changed cultures and so on, suddenly you feel like you're filling your head with information that just connects you to the human experience in ways that previously I thought were impossible. I always felt like I didn't have enough information. I felt outside of conversations. But just by focusing in on just major things, people suddenly think you're really knowledgeable, even though you don't know more than them. You just know maybe some information that's more relevant than what a lot of people know.
Yeah, and that also enables you to grow personally, because you know, from those experiences or from those events that were turning points, you can then, deduce things that are valuable for your own life, which you couldn't before, right?
Yeah, exactly. You're looking at what people, I guess one way to look at it is, instead of looking at yourself and your own life and the people around you, you're looking at the whole world, the life of human history, and the experiences of people all over the world, and putting yourself into perspective. That doesn't mean that you're insignificant. It actually makes you feel more significant because you're a small part of a really, really big story. And somehow I just personally find that very, very exciting.
That's great.
Do you, what have you applied mnemonics to that you've found the most exciting recently?
This was fairly recently. So I tried to apply mnemonics to everyday life now pretty heavily. So when coming here, I make it a habit, and it's kind of joyful as well, to not look at my cell phone, to not look at Google Maps. So what I'll do is I'll just look up, a route which I have to take. Like I have to take the U-Bahn and then the bus and whatever. And I'll just memorize the numbers and the way that I have to take, right? So when coming here, I just memorized my way to the place we were staying at. And it was so joyful because I kind of felt freedom. It's really weird, and it sounds a little cheesy, right? But I really felt freedom. I really felt, do you know the feeling when
like
you...
not having to refer to your screen.
Like all the time, you look up something and then the next minute you forgot it and you have to look it up again.
Right.
It just feels like you're just stupid in a sense, or you forget so much so easily. And when you just know where you are, when you just know where you have to go, you have your brain free to enjoy the surroundings and other things. And also you have the freedom or the feeling that you just know, and it's just a beautiful feeling because it gives you so much self-confidence that you can actually find your way with ease and that you'll remember it.
Yeah, it's funny. That's exactly my answer to the question as well, because I think that having a map in mind of the area right around you, even in a place you've never been or in a new area in a city that you know, just knowing where you are and feeling like, kind of like I was describing earlier, you're not just on a couple of streets lost. You feel like you're a part of a large map and you know where you are on that map, and you don't have to reference the little screen in front of you. I think that also ties back to what we were saying earlier about mnemonics in the 21st century. The fact that, sure, the information's at our fingertips, but our brains were created to remember things. They have the incredible capacity to remember large amounts of information. And we need to exercise that. It's a really fulfilling and human thing to do. And when we do that, it really creates connections in our minds and that sense of liberty and freedom to know where we are in the world and where we are in our local environment, and to feel also just being kind of selfish and egoistic. People will ask us which way is which and where we are, and think that we're really smart for just having the map around us memorized.
So thank you, Timothy, for coming on the show. It was really nice talking to you. Thank you for having you. And
yeah, I appreciate that. I look forward to more conversations on these topics, and I'm really excited for this show.
yeah, thank you very much.
Wenn dir diese Episode gefallen hat, hinterlass uns doch ein Review auf iTunes oder Castbox für Android. Den Link dazu findest du in der Description. Wenn du direkt hier im Rethinking Memory Memory Café dabei sein möchtest, dann melde dich bei mir unter rethinkingmemory.com/Kontakt. Ich freue mich auf deinen Besuch.